What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I wanted to bring to you a card discussion on Evenly Matched, the brand new Chase Secret Rare Out of Circuit Break. Now if you're questioning to yourself, didn't Cimoooooooo already make a video about this card? And as a matter of fact, I did. Back in June, when this card was first announced for the OCG, I did a video discussing my initial thoughts about this card and kind of the implications that it might have, not only on the OCG meta, but also the TCG meta as well. However, that was 4 months ago, and as you know, back then we were still in Zodiac True Draco format, so a lot has changed since then. So not only did I want to go more in depth talking about the pros and the cons of Evenly Matched, but I also wanted to discuss it now in the context of the brand new format that we currently find ourselves in. Now, for those of you who don't know, Evenly Matched is a trap card that reads, at the end of the battle phase, if your opponent controls more cards than you do, you can make your opponent banish cards from their field face down so they control the same number of cards as you do. If you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. So, this is an extremely powerful card, and honestly, this is going to be one of the most format-defining cards we've had in a very long time. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you think about it, Evenly Matched is one of those cards that's going to have a prolific impact on this game pretty much until it gets banned, or it just becomes to the point where the game has evolved to a state where a card like this becomes irrelevant. But Evenly Matched is so generic that not only is it going to be seen in side decks for years to come, but it has such an easy activation requirement, and it has such a powerful yield in terms of what you're able to get out of it in terms of removing all of your opponent's threats, that there's a lot of value in this single card. Now, I wanted to discuss this a little bit more in depth. So, a couple of the little intricacies of this card. So, when you're resolving this card, your opponent chooses which cards they wish to banish, and also, you have to wait until the end of the battle phase. That's something very important to note. Now, it is a bit unfortunate, we're going to get to the cons a little bit more in depth a little bit later in the video, but it is unfortunate that your opponent gets to pick because they still get to leave themselves with the best card on the field. But I guess if you were the one picking the cards for them, it would just be completely unfair because then you're just leaving them with the shittiest card that they have on their field. But I wanted to talk about this because the reason why this is so powerful is because not only are we at a point in the game where Dark Hole and Regeki are both at 1, in addition to Torrential Tribute and Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, this card is at 3. And in addition to that, this is better than a board wipe because of the fact that it banishes all of the cards that your opponent has face down. So not only does it hit their monsters, but it also hits their spells and traps as well, their pendulum scales, their field spells, everything that they have, assuming that, you know, whatever they keep isn't any of those, you know, it's just gonna get banished. And the fact that it banishes face down is insane because that means it's not only going to not trigger cards that have graveyard-based effects, like let's say something like ABC pieces or True Draco spell or traps, or like Burning Abyss monsters, for example, but those cards can't be used for anything else. So again, for the instance of ABC, they can't banish their pieces because they're being banished face down. They're pretty much removed from the game entirely. And then also like True Draco spell and traps, they're not going to be able to banish those for Masterpiece's effect or anything like that. So Evenly Matched is kind of like if Evil Swarm Exciton Knight met Psyframe Overload, and they kind of fornicated, and this was the grotesque child of that unification. So it's really weird, but it's really powerful at the same time. Now, one dynamic I do want to talk about that is a pro, but I'm not necessarily a fan of, is the fact that Evenly Matched rewards you for being behind. And this is something that I took issue with Exciton, which I'm thankful that it's banned, but it's a card that, you know, your opponent establishes their board, and for really no cost, you get to summon out something like Exciton, or now in this case we have Evenly Matched, and now by doing so, you pretty much wipe your opponent completely clean of resources. And I don't necessarily like that there's a card that rewards you for being behind in the game. Just fundamentally, that just, in terms of like card advantage and everything like that, I just don't like the mechanic of a card rewarding you that heavily. Now, you could make the argument that board wipes are like that, but I think it's a little bit different when you have something like a board wipe compared to something that hits all cards on the field, like in the instance of Exciton or Evenly Matched. But again, a lot of players like that because in this, break my board format that we currently have, someone establishes a huge board, and if they can't break it, then they kind of just lose. So a card like Evenly Matched is a bit of an equalizer in that sense because it allows another player to essentially have an opportunity to get back into the game and then actually have a chance to play. Now, obviously, we've come and evolved to the point where the break my board format isn't necessarily as bad as it's been. I know, spirals are coming out and that's kind of, gonna change some things, but the format of like, Pendulum Magician and, Draco, ABC, all these other types of things, these decks had some form of interaction because they really only had one threat that you really had to deal with, and then once you remove that one threat, you could go on with your play. But now Spiral might be changing that game up a little bit because now instead of like one piece of disruption, you're gonna have to deal with like 3 to 4, so maybe that's just completely different. Now, I do want to discuss some of the downsides of this card as well, because there are downsides. First off, it is a trap card, which means it is inherently slower than something like a board wipe like Dark Hole or Raigeki, so you're not going to be able to get immediate value off of it. Now, if you're attempting to get the value off of it, the issue is you have to wait until the end of the battle phase, and the reason why that's bad is because you not only have to relinquish your battle phase, but you also have to most likely relinquish your main phase 1 as well, because if you're attempting to build your board up, but your opponent has all this disruption in your way, you pretty much have to go straight to your battle phase, drop this card from your hand, remove all of your opponent's threats, and then you can proceed with your play in main phase 2. And that's a pretty significant drawback because you're wasting 2 essential phases of any turn just to activate and resolve this one card. Now again, the payoff is definitely there if you're able to establish your own board that's very difficult for your opponent to break, and that means a lot. But again, that's a very, very high cost that isn't necessarily cited in the card's text itself, but is something you definitely have to keep in mind. Another thing too is, I mentioned earlier how your opponent gets to dictate which cards they banish and which cards they keep, so best case scenario with Evenly Matched is they're only going to be left with one card in their possession. However, the card that they choose to pick in their possession is most likely going to be a card that's going to be able to disrupt you in some way, and by using Evenly Matched, let's say it's the second turn of the game, you're on 6 cards, you use Evenly Matched, so now you're down to 5, and your opponent's most likely still going to have one card to disrupt you, whether it's something like ABC Dragon Buster or Masterpiece, or something like a Spiral Sleeper, since we're moving into Spiral format. So that's something you do have to keep in mind, is that most likely your opponent's going to keep a card that's going to disrupt you in some way, and so even though you still have 5 cards at your disposal to deal with that one card, you have to realize that if you don't have another way to deal with whatever answer they still have on their board, then Evenly Matched isn't going to really do you a whole lot of good, even though it kind of evens out the playing field. Now, the last thing I want to discuss, and this is very relevant because of the current format we're in, is set rotation. Set rotation actually hard counters Evenly Matched, because if your opponent goes first, they activate set rotation and give you a field spell, you now control a card on your field, and you can't drop Evenly Matched from your hand because you now control a card. And that's a really big deal because you can't just set that card, because most likely your opponent's gonna have some sort of removal to use on your end phase or before they go to the end of their next battle phase. But even beyond that, if they go to the battle phase because you didn't do anything else, you're most likely just fucking dead, because they're just gonna OTK you at that point because they disrupted the Evenly Matched, and now you have this one card that's now a dead card in your hand. They can disrupt the majority of your board because their board is so strong, and then you're just gonna get OTK'd next turn. So set rotation being played in almost pretty much every meta deck at the moment outside of Pendulum Magician because it doesn't utilize field spells, but it's being played in Spiral, it's being played in True Draco, in ABC, especially now with Destrudo being released as well. That's a really, really big deal, and it's something that you really need to think about in terms of whether or not you feel that this card is worth playing and worth the payoff. But overall, like I said, this is a format defining card. This is gonna be one of those cards like Gores or like Mirror Force that's gonna go down in history, and players are always going to be trying to play around it, because if you don't play around this card, you're gonna get punished extremely hard, and there's nothing you can do about it. This isn't like Exciton where you can use use Solemn Strike on it, they can just drop evenly matched, and because of the fact that it's a trap like that, it actually has a lot less ways to deal with in comparison to something like Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about evenly matched. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, and I'm really curious to see how evenly matched is going to perform not only at YCS Dallas, but also YCS San Diego a month later. And I guess YCS London is only a couple weeks away as well, so it'll be really interesting to see how people decide to use evenly matched. But guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.